To start this painting, we first need to draw out our polar bear. So I'm just going to show you the steps that I took to draw out my polar bear cub. So you are just going to start with drawing a small circle for the head. I'm doing this on a scratch piece of paper first, and then I'm going to transfer it over to my watercolor paper. So I'm going to be doing a lot of like loose lines and not being too particular about how perfect it is. So in the center I have my little circle for the head, and then I'm going to create a larger, like an oval, for the body. Just going to erase the lines that was too close. I want my polar bear to be looking up into the sky. So I'm going to then add his nose, which is a little bit more of a box shape. It kind of comes out like it's going to become a triangle, but then you just stop and make more of a square. And then I'm going to add a little rounded nose, and then a little smile. And then I'm going to add a little ear. Like that. And then I'm going to connect the head into that circle we drew. And then from here, so close to the bottom of the larger ovalish circle, I'm going to create like a curved line for the leg. And then I'm going to have another curved line going the opposite way, right beneath it. And then I'm going to create a little foot. And then I'm going to bring down the back of this circle and just connect it into the polar bear's foot. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to bring down from just a tiny little bit away from the chest. So maybe like center from the middle of the neck. I'm going to bring down curved his other little paw. Just like that. And then on this other side, so it would be behind the polar bear's belly, I'm going to add another foot right next to the first one. And then I'm going to add some lines here for that arm, little fluffy, jagged lines. And then I'm going to add another foot over here. So it's just going to be a curved line that comes a little bit past that second foot we put in, and then create another foot coming off, and then just tuck that behind, kind of let it hide behind those two front feet. And then we're going to give it a little tail. And then I'm going to give it a little eye, looking up into the sky. And then you can use a thicker amount of pressure to outline the final areas that we drew. I'll do that so you can really see where our polar bear is. And I will have a still image of this polar bear over on my blog, so you can head over there if you would like to just trace over the sketch and then trace it onto your watercolor paper. But there is our little polar bear. I'm going to transfer him over to my watercolor paper and we can get painting. Now we can start painting. So I'm going to take a pencil and I'm going to quickly draw in my light horizon line. So I'm actually going to have the horizon line above the polar bear's head. So about a third of the way up from the bottom, just going to lightly sketch in that line. And then what we're going to do is take our flat brush and we're just going to apply a light, even coat of water over the entire sky area. Like that. And then I already have my colors mixed up on the side, so I'm just going to go straight into my dark blue paint mixture. And I'm going to paint this in for the majority of our sky. So this is just a mixture of ultramarine blue and black. I've been using this color a lot in my recent paintings. And then about a third of the way down from the top, I'm going to completely rinse off my flat brush. And I'm going to go into my pink paint. And from the bottom, so I'm going to paint it in right there, all clean. Get a little bit more pigment on my brush. And then I'm going to blend it in upward. Just kind of blend it together, kind of going up and down. And then I'm going to clean my brush off and get a little bit more pink since I mixed those colors together on my brush. I just want a little bit more bright pink to make this area a little bit thicker and deeper in tone. Just like that. Right, and then we are going to let our sky dry, and then we're going to come back in with some trees. Now that the first layer of the sky has dried, I actually decided after it dried that it looked a little bit too washed out to me, so I want to go back in with a second coat. So I am first going to go into my pink paint. I'm not even going to wet the sky, I'm just going to go straight in with my pink and just apply that right over where I had the pink to begin with. Get down on the horizon line there. And then I'm going to clean my brush. And then I'm going to go into my navy blue paint mixture again. And again, without even putting any water down, I'm just going to add this, and then I'm going to blend it together. Going to blend all the way up, clean my brush off, get a little bit more pink, and blend that up. So just like that. I think just adding a little bit more pigment is really going to make a big difference when we put our trees and our stars in place. So now we're going to let this dry, and then we will come back in with our trees. So now to paint in our trees, I am first going to take some clean water on my round brush, and I am just going to wet a straight line of clean water along the horizon because I want the very bottom of our trees to blend into our white area to make it look like snow. So I'm going to switch over to a smaller detail brush, and I'm going to go into my Payne's Gray paint. Dab off any extra, and this is wet on dry, so I'm just going to start by drawing my tree trunk and letting it blend. And then doing little tiny zigzagged lines, starting short and then getting wider as I go down for my trees. I'm going to get a little bit more pigment on my brush. Go back over what I just did with that darker pigment. So I want these to be very dark. Then bring it right down to that horizon line where it should be the widest. And then I'm just going to touch into that wet area. I'm going to take that clean wet brush I had earlier and just kind of let that work out and down a little bit just to blend it. I'm going to do this as I go so that it doesn't get too dry and make it harder to activate the paint as I go along. So after you blend, you're going to want to clean your brush every time just so that so you don't keep getting more and more dark paint on it and then really having a black smudge. All right, so now I'm going to go into my next tree and do the exact same thing. So letting it touch at the wet area at the bottom and then zigzagging all the way down. And you can leave little empty spots on your trees. They don't all need to be the same width and height. You can really experiment with your trees here. Just kind of have fun with them, especially since they're not the main focus of this painting. Just a great one to practice. And I'm trying my best not to create a distinct pattern with my trees. I want them to feel very random in their height and shape, just everything about them. I want it to feel very random. Right here, I'm just going to blend out my trunk a little bit. I think it was looking too much like a straight line. It was coming through a little bit much. I'm just kind of blending that out. So I'm just adding some more clean water across the bottom since it's really drying. almost done with our layer of trees. I think we have room for one or two more. I'm just going to do one really thick one. And then a little one right off to the side. Get a little bit more pigment on my brush. And just add those details real quick. Going back to that last one I had just done because that tree trunk looked really bold. All right, and then I'm just going to go and blend this down. Just kind of across. I'm going to come back to this one. It looks very light and just add a little bit more pigment. All right, and there you have your forest in the background. We're going to let this dry and then we're going to move on to our polar bear and then the snow around him. So now what we're going to do is fill in our polar bear with a layer of clean water. This is going to allow us to add some detail to our polar bear, like outlines and just showing some shadowing that'll just blend nicely into him without taking away from the white page that we want to still show through on our polar bear because our polar bear is white. So we're going to start by making a light blue paint mixture. And I am going to use this blue paint mixture to outline the entire polar bear. I'm doing this just to give him a little bit more color rather than having him be completely gray. So usually I use gray to kind of bring out the white in the page and just use the gray as like a shadowing. So for this polar bear, I'm going to do both. I'm going to use this light blue and then we're going to go back in with gray. So I have made a mixture of blue paint with a lot of water and just a little bit of blue because I want it just to be like a glow for this polar bear rather than it being really dark and obvious that I have some blue on him. So just fill him in all around the outline with that paint. And then you can mix together a very light wash of Payne's Gray. So the same idea, taking a lot of water and that paint and just making the lightest paint mixture of gray you can. And then we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to go into our polar bear and even over that blue paint we just put in, we're going to put in that Payne's Gray paint and kind of layer over it. So we want these two colors to blend together and just kind of work together to give this polar bear some outlines. So in certain areas, you're going to see that I'm tapping in like along his legs, around his chest, under his neck to really show that deep shadowing of him so that it really helps those features stand off the page rather being so flat. You don't want your gray paint to go over your entire polar bear. You want the center of him to really stay white. And so this is just great wet on wet practice for only letting that paint go where you put it rather than it just seeping through the whole polar bear. So while our polar bear dries, I'm going to clean off my brush and I'm going to blend out my horizon line just a little bit. I felt like that tree layer kind of blended in a little weirdly with the white page underneath it. So I'm just going to blend that out, and I'm going to reapply some Payne's Gray paint, and as well I'm going to put just a little bit of that pink paint right up against that horizon line, just to kind of help smooth out some rough edges I really saw forming once it dried. And then I'm going to take that really light wash of Payne's Gray and I'm going to apply that further down to really give the appearance of the shadow of snow instead of having just a blank white page behind our polar bear. So now you see me filling in that area I had just smoothed out and had put some clean water on. I am now going to tap in some darker Payne's Gray paint to just kind of make that horizon line just a little bit more bold and just to really smooth out those edges that I thought looked really rough. And then I'm going to take my flat brush over that and very lightly, so my flat brush is going to be completely dry, and I'm just going to go over that and just smoothly blend that out. And this will really just help keep that horizon line looking clean and nice, but still giving that shadow below the trees so that, again, it doesn't seem flat. It's going to help it blend into the rest of the painting. Now I'm going to apply a clean layer of water around the base of the polar bear. I'm not going to go completely around him, just around the area where he would be sitting. So I'm just going to take that clean water and I'm just going to be putting that all around him. You'll see me blending out some areas that I thought were drying weirdly above him. But mainly I just want to have this nice layer of water so that I can start tapping in that dark blue paint mixture all around the polar bear. So at this point, my bear is pretty much dried, but I'm still going to be very careful not to get any of this paint on him. I want it just to outline him rather than seep into him. So you'll just see me tapping in that color all around him where I applied that the clean layer of water. And then I'm going to blend that color out into the water. So I want it to be darker toward my polar bear. And then as we pull that paint away, we want it to blend out into the white page. Again, we want this to be a shadow on the snow. And so once you have that first layer in place, even if it looks all the same color to you, just go back in with a little bit of darker paint and just tap in around his feet and his bottom area, and it will really make that shadow look natural and stand out. And again, if you feel like your shadow is kind of drying with some harsh lines, just take some clean water on your brush, start away from the shadow, and then blend toward the shadow so that once that clean water hits the wet paint, that paint will just blend out into it instead of having that harsh line where the paint stops and the white page begins. So now we are going to let our polar bear completely dry and make sure that all of the area around him is dried as well. And then we're going to come back in and finish him off with some final details. So now to finish off our polar bear, we are going to make a light mixture of Payne's Gray again. And we are going to apply this all over our polar bear's outline. But instead of doing wet on wet, we're going to do wet on dry. So we're going to have our wet paint on our dry polar bear. And outlining our polar bear with this light wash of Payne's Gray is really going to help just finish off his look and really give him the extra detail that he needs to really feel finished. So I just very carefully took the tip of my brush and outlined the entire polar bear, going through the lines on the legs and all around him. And then I'm going to take a really dark mixture of Payne's Gray, again, on the tip of my brush, and I'm going to fill in the polar bear's eye, eyebrow, nose, and mouth. And this is really just going to finish off those facial details that really make him come to life. Now we're going to let our polar bear completely dry, and then once he's completely dry, we will come back in and we are going to splatter white paint over the sky to create our stars. So now all we have to do is load up our small detail brush with a lot of white paint and make sure that you use enough water so that when you do tap your brush, the paint will come off the brush. So it just kind of takes some practice knowing the right balance of paint and water. But you're just going to take that brush very closely to your sky. You want it to be close to it rather than far away so that it just hits the sky area. And then just start tapping that brush all over the sky area of this painting. If any of that white paint gets on your trees or any other area that you don't like, just take a paper towel and dab it off while it's still wet. Now I am going to show you how to paint in our more distinct star. So I'm going to take that same mixture of white paint. I'm going to have a really thick mixture, so a lot of paint and not a lot of water. And I'm just going to go in on the far left side of my sky, and I'm going to very carefully with the tip of my brush paint in my star. I'm going to start with a straight line, and then I'm going to create a cross in the center, and that line is going to be shorter than the one I just did. And then I'm going to add 2 little lines that go in between the cross. So it's going to be basically you're making a cross and then you're going to make an X in between where the cross meets. And each line you add is just going to be shorter than the last. So that first line is the longest, the second line is a little bit shorter, and then that cross is going to be shorter than that last line. And there you have your winter polar bear scene. Hey everyone, thanks for watching today's video. I hope you enjoyed it and found it helpful. If you did, please subscribe to this channel and give this video a thumbs up. I hope to see you again soon. Bye.